Hi everyone, welcome to the February 1st edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and there was a lot to recap in the racing world from this past week. Obviously, on Saturday at Gulfstream Park, they ran the Pegasus World Cup card. The big race, we'll talk about a few things out of it, trips, the performance of the winner, tactics, a lot to discuss about that race, but there's also plenty other to discuss on that Gulfstream Park card on Saturday, the Pegasus World Cup turf, a couple of other turf stakes, also a sprint stakes, the Fred Hooper won impressively by Speaker's Corner, and then beyond Gulfstream, there was a Derby prep that took place at Oaklawn Park, a pretty interesting emerging 3-year-old filly that we should discuss from the Martha Washington, and then some other big speed figures from a few other venues like Santa Anita, Laurel, and even a race from Tampa Bay Downs that caught a lot of people's attention on Sunday. So Craig, a lot to dive into, but we do have to start with the Pegasus World Cup, which was the headline attraction from last weekend, and just kind of give me your impressions of the race.
I'm not really surprised by the outcome. Life is Good. I thought he was the fastest horse going in, both early, and I figured that would give him a tactical advantage. But I was a bit surprised by the tactics on Knicks Go. I know you're going to have a few things to say about that, but I just don't get it. It was the horse's last race. It's puzzling these days. I guess as handicappers, we have to adapt to how the current landscape of horse racing. And I guess we just have to realize that trainers and jockeys are going to be really reluctant to get into speed duels these days. And sometimes they're going to ride maybe not the best way to win and for the best placing. So it's not a whole lot more I can add about that. Maybe it was a smart decision. I mean, it's just really hard for me to say. It is a little frustrating as a bettor, though. I put on Twitter that Knicks Go actually ran quite a bit faster in that race early than he did in the Breeders' Cup Classic when he was able to go wire to wire without being challenged. And I kind of saw it as a similar scenario where others were just afraid to challenge him. And it seems like this time they were the ones afraid to challenge Life is Good.
Yeah, I'll say the post-race quotes from Brad Cox were a little confusing to me. Him just basically saying, oh, well, we just wanted to protect the horse. We didn't want to abuse him in his last race. I mean, he was speaking as if they never expected Knicks Go to win. And it's just, I don't know. That seems weird to me. I mean, I guess after the fact, they're trying to downplay expectations maybe as he heads off to stud. I suppose that's possible. But, I mean, maybe it wasn't Joel Rosario going rogue, as maybe I thought in the immediate aftermath of the race, because Brad Cox, in his post-race remarks, sounded content with the ride, as if that was the plan. I mean, you could decide for yourself what you saw coming out of the starting gate. I didn't see Rosario being aggressive at all. I would have thought that, as many people did, it wasn't just me, that a duel at some point was going to materialize, that breaking from the rail, Knicks Go would at least try to make Life is Good run a little bit, or as much as he could. I mean, I think we saw on the racetrack, and we kind of knew beforehand Life is Good was the naturally faster horse, but it didn't seem like Knicks Go would be, at least on paper, Knicks Go was not supposed to be struggling to stay ahead of Stiletto Boy and Endorsed in the opening quarter mile. So that was confusing to me. And it's not like It's not like Rosario was displeased with his early position. He just let Knicks Go settle into that rhythm and, fighting for second place about 3 or 4 lengths behind Life is Good. And you could tell a quarter mile into the race, or maybe even less than that the outcome was a foregone conclusion. Life is Good was not losing this race once he got that much of an advantage. I mean, he really did not have to run that much faster than he did in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile to beat this field once Knicks Go didn't show up. And he did improve his speed figure a little bit, Craig. I'll let you talk about that. He set a fast pace for the distance. Maybe Knicks Go never would have gotten his head in front, even if he had been sent aggressively after Life is Good. And at the end of the day, Life is Good is just a really nice horse, and he's going to have a big year in 2022 if he's able to stay on the racetrack.
Yeah, he sure is. And like you said, it was a bit puzzling. If you watch the head-on, it seemed like Joel was pretty intent on getting off the rail. He actually came in and came out and slammed in the chest chief pretty good. I saw some criticism of Jose Ortiz, but I thought he actually rode the race great. I mean, he did what he should do. He broke well. He was able to get to the inside, secure position, and that's what you want from a rider. So I thought he gave it a good shot. Stiletto Boy just always seems to show up and run his race. The speed figure was not very tough to make at all. There was another route on the card. They're usually consistent at Gulfstream. I think he can run even a little bit faster than what he did. I would question if he's a true 1.25 mile horse. I know that can get us in trouble sometimes. I remember it with the Baffert horse that won the Derby a couple years ago, whose name's escaping me. Seems to be getting tired at the end of his races, but he's just so fast that it's going to be hard for anyone for him not to establish a clear lead, which is always going to be dangerous.
Yeah, this race kind of leaves me with the impression that, in a weird way, even though it seemed like such a stronger field, I feel almost the way that I did when Knicks Go won this race last year, when he beat Jesus' team. Now, obviously, Life is Good beat Knicks Go in this race, but I don't think we saw the best version of Knicks Go. And at the end of the day, Life is Good is beating a field of horses that were, followed in order by Stiletto Boy and Endorsed and Sir Winston. Not the cream of the crop in the handicap division, let's just say. So, Life is Good was a dominant winner of this race. However, I saw a lot of the same things you did. It's not like Irad rode him out of the gate like he was expecting to get in some kind of speed duel. Life is Good is just that naturally fast that he immediately opens up that kind of advantage on his fields going this distance when other horses aren't coming out of the gate looking to run 150 plus TimeformUS pace figures going 1.125 miles. Life is Good is just naturally going to inherit a 3 or 4 length lead because he can do that in his sleep. But I saw the same thing as you in the last eighth of a mile. This horse was getting quite leg weary. He was drifting out in the middle of the track. Some will say Irad was gearing him down late. I put maybe not as much stock in that as some others do. I don't think this is a natural 1.25 mile horse. Now, maybe it won't matter if he's facing fields of this quality in the future going that distance. But I have some stamina concerns about Life is Good, just based on how naturally fast he is and how it seems like they can only rein him in so much in these races without really getting into a fight with him. So he's a very talented horse. I would love to see him in a race like the Met Mile over the summer. That race has a dream field basically shaping up with horses like Flightline. We'll talk about Speaker's Corner a little bit later. Some others that you could definitely mention possibly showing up in that race. That could be a really exciting affair because there are a lot of exciting dirt milers active in 2022. Life is Good being towards the top of that list. But we'll see if they target the Breeders' Cup Classic later in the year. They're already talking about trying a pretty tough 1.25 mile race in a couple months because Todd Pletcher and the connections are saying they might try the Dubai World Cup with him. We'll see how that works out. But he's definitely a very talented horse. Let's move on to the Pegasus World Cup turf, going that same 1.125 mile distance, but on the Gulfstream Park grass course. And Todd Pletcher racking up another Grade 1 victory. It was pretty tough to beat Todd's horses over this past weekend, especially on Saturday, Craig, as he sent out a lot of live runners. And he had the exacta in this Pegasus World Cup turf, sending out the winner, Colonel Liam, collecting his second straight victory in this race, and the runner-up never surprised.
Yeah, he dominated the race. It's kind of hard to really get a handle on what happened because we have no idea if the fractions that were posted are correct. There's no way for me to check them, as we discussed off air. We're just not given near enough information by Gulfstream. Hopefully it's something. I know they're aware of the problems and trying to get them fixed, but as horse players, it's frustrating. We had a Grade 1 race that's supposed to be the best horses in the division, and we can't time it. So I did the best I could given this race a rating. I gave it a 123 for the winner, Colonel Liam, 122 for Never Surprise. So I would say, I don't know if I really even consider this a true Grade 1 race. It wasn't the strongest field, kind of like the Pegasus, even on a lesser scale. Never Surprised. He could be a Grade 1 horse. I just don't think he is at this 1.125 mile distance. Colonel Liam, he's pretty good. The one thing I would say is he got a great ride from Irad Ortiz. He was kind of hustled early to get a closer position than he normally does. Was able to stay within shouting position. And I think it probably made the difference because despite the fact we don't know the fractions, it looked like a race that was pretty slow early to me. Now, there was definitely one trip in the race. I'm sure you noticed it as well. Space Traveler, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he had had a cleaner run.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying about maybe this not being the toughest grade one on the turf, but I mean, let's be honest, this Pegasus World Cup turf, it's never really been deserving of that World Cup moniker that's attached to it. I mean, it basically is the Gulfstream, what did this race used to be? The Gulfstream Park turf? I mean, it basically is that race still. So, I mean, I'd regard it that way. I would say that the race Colonel Liam won this year was stronger than the Pegasus turf that he won last year, and I think he ran a better race to win it this year, even coming off the layoff. Whereas last year, Irad gave him just a fantastic ride, saving ground and tipping out at the top of the stretch. I mean, he got another good trip this year, but I think he had to beat a better horse in doing so, and his stablemate never surprised. And even that horse that you mentioned, Craig, Space Traveler, I mean, he's been right there in some tough races and came to this country last year with some overseas credentials, and seems like he's improved recently for Brendan Walsh. And I agree about the trip for Space Traveler. I mean, it just seemed like maybe Jamie Spencer coming to the top of the stretch, he chose the wrong path, because he could have followed a runner up the rail, and I think there would have been a place to go if he had stayed down in that inside position. But he tried to tip off the rail coming to the quarter pole and just kind of got caught in behind horses, lost momentum, and he was really finishing up best of all over the final eighth of a mile. And you just wonder if he had been able to start that run a furlong or just maybe a half furlong sooner, he could have been right there with Colonel Liam. Probably should have been at least second in this race, if not better. But Colonel Liam, I mean, at the end of the day, he won this race by a length. Kudos to Todd Pletcher for having him ready off the long layoff. And he's just a pretty nice horse, and he's going to be a major force in this division for the rest of the year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wasn't knocking the winner. He ran great. He's proven that he's able to win in pretty top competition. He dead heated with domestic spending, though I don't think many would argue he was really better that day. But he's a top class horse, and as a newly turned 5-year-old, he should be reaching his peak. But he's not the kind of horse, if we start seeing some pretty good foreign shippers come over, that I would want to play against them.
Yeah, I agree with that. By the time we get around to the Breeders' Cup, or if there are some foreign shippers for some other races later in the year, they could be dangerous against a horse like Colonel Liam, who's basically topping out in the mid-120s with his speed figures. As for Never Surprise, the other Todd Pletcher horse, I thought that they rode him like they were a little concerned about him getting the distance. We've seen in some past rides on him, Kendrick Carmouche, who's ridden him, and Louis Saez, even when he's ridden him in the past, they've gotten a little bit more enterprising with their tactics, trying to open up on the fields mid-race. They clearly were not interested in doing that this time. They tried to keep it close. They really tried to slow down the pace in the opening quarter mile. You could see that happening. Once Never Surprised cleared off to the lead, Louis Saez really tugged back on the reins, and the entire field kind of condensed going into that clubhouse turn, and some others did have some traffic when the field came together at that point. But Never Surprised, I thought that he battled on gamely to the wire. Colonel Liam was just a better horse on the day. Move on to the other turf race with that Pegasus moniker, the Pegasus Filly and Mare Turf, a Grade 3 event, run a little bit earlier in the day at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. This one was won by the heavy favorite, the Chad Brown-trained Regal Glory. And Craig, really no doubt about it here, this mare was much the best.
Yeah, there's not really even a whole lot to talk about here, other than you were dead right on the forecast. She really towered over this field. I know me and Barry maybe tried to get a little too creative, but she was just much the best. She won by 2.5 lengths. It may as well have been 10 visually. She was wide all the way around. Didn't seem to matter. To me, the sad thing is she's done racing from what I read after the race, because I'd like to see where she was going to go, because she ran a 120 speed figure. I think she's capable of better, and she seems to really just be reaching her peak. So a shame to see her go, but she certainly went out in style, because that was impressive.
Yeah, I was reading the article that just came out a few days ago about, Life is Good and where they're going after the race. And I think in that article, I forget who wrote it on DRF.com, Peter Brandt was quoted as saying, maybe he's having some second thoughts. I mean, she is booked into Mischief, but she's so sound right now, and it seems like she's really at the top of her game. He said he's going to have a powwow with Chad Brown and decide if they really are retiring her, if they're going to run her for her 6-year-old season. Based on this effort, it does seem like that's all true. She really is in the best form of her career right now, because while this wasn't the toughest field in the world, she did not get the kind of trip that I think most people expected. I think you would have anticipated that she'd be much closer to the pace than she was. She didn't break that sharply, got shuffled back in the early going, and she had to cover a lot of ground on that far turn, making that big wide run to take over. But I mean, it didn't matter. She was just so much better than these horses. I don't have a whole lot to say about those that were behind her, Craig. I thought Alms battled on gamely for second after setting the pace. A little surprising to see her in front ahead of Shifty She in the early going. But there just wasn't a whole lot of closing going on from the back of the pack, aside from the winner, Regal Glory.
Yeah, it was definitely a one-horse race. The rest was really a grade 3 field. So to me, that's good news that maybe they're going to keep her around, because I think she could really do some damage this year.
Run between those two Pegasus turf races. The 10th race on the card at Gulfstream on Saturday was the Grade 3 Fred W. Hooper going the 1-turn mile on the dirt. And I was a little surprised, Craig, that Speaker's Corner did not go off the favorite in this race. The Gulfstream bettors and the U.S. bettors, I should say, actually made Fearless the slight favorite, I guess, just hopping on that Todd Pletcher train, which did seem like it was pretty unstoppable at Gulfstream Park lately, and especially on Saturday. But Speaker's Corner able to win nonetheless. See what seemed like a pretty competitive pace watching the race. I'll let you talk about it. It's maybe not so after the fact, as I think this race had to be retimed. But still, Speaker's Corner just ran the best race on the day.
Yeah, he did. Those who listen to our forecast know I'm not one to play much chalk. But I actually thought Speaker's Corner was great value in here at 3-2. I thought he was much the best, and I actually played a straight exacta because, as we talked about, it looked like just a 2-horse race, and I thought I was pretty sure of which one would win, and Speaker's Corner was able to do so pretty easily. Now, the fractions that popped up on the screen certainly looked very impressive. A 22 flat, a 44-4, going the mile with very short run-up, and I should have known right away, and I kind of did, that something was amiss, as there often is with those mile races at Gulfstream. I actually time every single one they ever run and adjust it to video timing, because for some reason they really struggle with those races. I think it's the short run up, but the race and the fractions were actually much slower than what was posted, over a second. It has since been adjusted. The pace was just moderate. It's not going to be blue. It's not going to be red in the TimeformUS PPs. Speaker's Corner ran a 121 TimeformUS speed figure. Fearless ran a 118, and then it was just a huge gap back to third. So no real surprises. I'm not sure what to expect of Speaker's Corner. I thought maybe he'd run a better figure, but I'm not sure the 1 turn is really what he's going to do best. So I would expect both him and Fearless to maybe go back to 2 turns after this one.
It's funny how much you've got in my head, Craig, about these things, just constantly questioning the times for better or worse, because even when I was watching this race live, I was kind of saying to the person that was with me, these fractions are wrong. I mean, there's no way that they could go 22 flat with a 5 feet run up going the mile at Gulfstream Park. That just has to be incorrect. And I wasn't surprised when I saw you tweet a little bit later that the time, and really most of the fractions are about a second slower. And in retrospect, when you go back and rewatch this race, that is pretty apparent. I mean, the 2 horses that were involved in the pace with Speaker's Corner, they ended up finishing 3rd and 4th. It's not like this is a race that completely fell apart. Fearless actually ran pretty well to get up for second here and make it as close as he did at the end after kind of getting a little bit discouraged and outrun in the early going. I mean, breaking from the rail, that was always going to be the danger with Fearless, going that 1-turn mile. But Speaker's Corner, I think he's just a little bit better, and his tactical speed does give him that advantage over a horse like Fearless all the time, going a distance like this. So, I mean, Speaker's Corner's run some pretty big speed figures in his last couple starts, both the Discovery and when he won that allowance race back at Belmont in October. If he can build on those types of numbers, I think he's the kind of horse that could and should be pointed towards a race like the Met Mile later in the year, but I think he's going to have to step up because this was probably a little bit closer than it could have been given the way the pace shook out.
Yeah, I saw some comments too about Fearless, how he was under a drive for a long time, and I just say to those people, go watch his replays, because he's a horse you really have to get after. If you don't, he'll drop right off the map early in his races, and he just has to be ridden that way. So it was nothing really out of the unusual for him.
Another turf race to mention from Saturday at Gulfstream was the Grade 3 McKnight, going 1.5 miles a little earlier in the day. And this one was won by the Todd Pletcher-trained Aban, a horse that When I handicapped this race on my Pegasus live stream earlier in the week, I was way against this horse. This was the favorite that I was most against on the card. And sometimes you just have to admit you're wrong. And I was really wrong about Aban because he has stepped forward quite a bit since Todd Pletcher has stretched him out to these marathon distances. And he ran a lot better in this race than I thought was possible. This was a pretty nice performance from this horse.
It was. He's a horse who broke his tag as a late 4-year-old and a maiden claimer at Saratoga and has just ascended up, getting better every time, stretching out in distance. And he ran a career best 120 Timeform US speed figure. It's hard to say how he did last time because there were no fractions for that race or reliable fractions. This one, I was able to trust him, and it was just kind of even. But he wasn't on the lead, so he kind of showed a new dimension. He was able to sit just off another horse, and he's just winning his races really easy. So when you consider he was only about 3 points behind Colonel Liam, obviously at different distances, but this was probably a little bit better than a grade 3 performance, and the future seems bright for him. He's just, I would have been against him too had I handicapped his races because it just seems like things have been going his own way, but he's moving in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to characterize his trip as being a tough one, because it wasn't. I mean, he was stalking, as you said, a pretty moderate pace. But, I mean, the runner-up in this race, Temple, did close from pretty far back. Some other horses, like Sole Volante, who was fourth, they made some mild closing runs. So it's not like this was a total merry-go-round race. And Aban did take over pretty early on the far turn to kind of open this race up, and I thought he stayed on gamely through the late stages of the race. He's just a graded stakes quality horse, and I was kind of doubtful that he was coming in here, based partly on what you were mentioning, Craig, the fact that he had broken his maiden for a tag, that it didn't seem like there were very high expectations of him early on, but he really has kind of found his niche as one of these marathon turf horses. So we'll see what they try to do with him. There's that 2-mile race at Belmont a little bit later in the year, I believe, as part of the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival. Maybe they'll target a race like that because it really does seem like he's one that can run all day. But he's a decent horse. One more graded stakes to mention from that Saturday card at Gulfstream was the Grade 2 inside information for the fillies and mares going 7 furlongs on the main track. This one was won by the favorite, one of many favorites to win on that Saturday card, just one time, making her first start off the trainer switch to Brad Cox. Craig, I would say that she was definitely the best horse on the day, but probably not the kind of trip that you were expecting if you backed her at a short price.
No, she was acting a little goofy at the gate, and I think it cost her early, but she was able to step up way in competition and get the job done. The inside information, it's a grade 2. Make no mistake, this was not a grade 2 race. The speed figure says that. The horses in the race kind of told you that. This was more like a grade 3 or even listed stakes, but just one time was able to get the job done. First time for Brad Cox. She ran a 110 Timeform US speed figure, which is the top she's run by a little bit. And it wasn't a great trip, so maybe there's a little more in the tank there, but just wasn't blown away by the race. The one thing I did say on Twitter that I would love to see is her and Chubwagon hook up, because they're both Pennsylvania-bred filly sprinters. Chubwagon's a mare by now, but they'll be racing against each other at some point, I would hope. And that's a race I would actually love to see.
Yeah, I was just scrolling through Twitter before we came on, and I saw some pictures somebody posted of Chubwagon playing in the snow today. So maybe she's not quite ready to race yet, but nice to see her enjoying her winter break. So we'll see if these two hook up at some point. Yeah, just one time. I will say, just about her trip, I was a little critical of Joel Rosario and just the connections in general in the Pegasus World Cup, but one of Joel's great talents is that he never panics. And when this horse broke slowly, he didn't show any urgency to get this horse into the race. He basically just kind of threw her running style out of his head and said, I'm going to ride this horse like a closer, get her to settle towards the back of the pack. And horses just seemed to respond to him and relax under him. And that's what happened with Just One Time. She really didn't get ranked. She was able to settle towards the back of the pack and launch that wide run. And she still had something to finish with, even though she covered all that ground. So a good effort and a good ride by Rosario. Also a nice performance from Four Graces to be second in here. She's a horse that also is showing a new dimension in this race. She's one that's been more of a speed type in the past, but just wasn't quite quick enough to go with the leaders here, so had to adapt to coming from off the pace. But like you said, Craig, there are going to be tougher grade 2 events in this division later in the year, you would think. Moving on to a couple of non-stakes at Gulfstream from this past weekend. One of those did take place on that Saturday card, a synthetic handicap won by Wolfie's Dynaghost, a horse that we've talked about a little bit on this podcast in both dirt and turf races, Craig, and I believe this was his first ever start on the synthetic, and seems like he really took to this new surface.
Yeah, he did. This was one I'll admit I was kicking myself for, because as I was watching the build up to the race, I kept looking at his odds and I couldn't believe it, but I just kind of had it in my mind that I wasn't going to play the synthetic races because I don't really know a whole lot about him. But I mean, he had run well on dirt, he had run well on turf, and his speed figure certainly fit. So I didn't get the 20-1 odds at all, and he ran really well. He got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure. He set a very fast pace. The early fractions are going to be in red for this race, and something you don't often see on that surface is he was able to just dig in and hold on. So I don't know what the future holds for him, but he's certainly got a lot of options because I think he's won on all three surfaces now, dirt, turf, and synthetic.
Yeah, it's just kind of a funny race. I mean, those first couple of fractions were fast. You see that in the TimeformUS PPs, both color-coded red. But the race really did slow down in the middle portion, and it's not a race that completely fell apart at the end. I mean, it really was dominated by horses that had that forward position by the halfway point in the race. So, I mean, Wolfie's Dynaghost, I think getting that mid-race breather really did allow him to re-break in the stretch and hold on. But a good ride by Rayla Gutierrez on this horse to show aggression coming out of the gate, get that forward position that Wolfie's Dynaghost tends to require when he runs his best races, and he's just a really versatile horse. I mean, there's been a lot of debate I've seen about which surface really is best for him. I know some people are in the dirt camp, some people are in the turf camp based on his pedigree, him being that half to Sadler's Joy, but now there's another surface in the mix. I mean, he's just a solid horse overall that seems to be able to do a few different things. And the other race that we should mention before we move on to a different venue that took place at Gulfstream last week was a maiden race on Friday for the males, won by High Front. This one was going 5 furlongs on the turf, and High Front is a first-time starter that was going out for Jonathan Thomas. And Craig, it's not often that we see these 5 furlong turf races at Gulfstream won by over 6 lengths, but that's what this horse did, turning in a pretty dominant performance.
Yeah, I actually had to look this race up once you sent the rundown for today's show because I hadn't seen this one, and that was impressive. I mean, he just popped the gate. He was quick out and just kept getting further and further away as the race went on. So really big effort from him. Again, unfortunately, it was another race where we don't really have reliable fractions. It's just the final time rating. But High Front's got a 108 TimeformUS speed figure, which for a 3-year-old this early in the year, that's a nice one.
Yeah, I have no idea how fast this race actually went, as you were saying, Craig, but it did seem like there was some quality among the runners behind him. It's not like he was beating nobody by 6.5 lengths. And just visually watching this horse, he's got a massive stride on him, and I love the way he moves. I mean, the way he just powered away through the stretch and continuing to maintain that stride all the way through the wire. It's like he was running at the same pace the entire race, whereas everybody else was slowing down. Very impressive performance, and a horse that I think you could get pretty excited about. I know that sometimes these 5 furlong races at Gulfstream can produce performances that you don't always see duplicated at other tracks, but this seems like a pretty talented horse that I wouldn't be surprised if we see stretched out in distance at some point. Let's move on to our next venue, Oaklawn Park, where they did run a Derby prep last weekend, the Grade 3 Southwest. I believe this one, I want to say offering 10 qualifying points to the winner. I might be wrong about that. I don't think this was a 20-point race, but the winner of this race, Newgrange, will not be receiving any Kentucky Derby qualifying points since he is trained by Bob Baffert. But let's talk about him anyway, Craig. Newgrange came into this race undefeated 2 for 2, took his record to now 3 in a row, and I think he did what was expected of him by the public that made him the prohibitive favorite in this race, though not the fastest Derby prep that we're going to see.
No, not by any stretch. I guess the one upside would be that he showed a little bit of a new dimension. He was able to lay a little bit off of a fast pace and still improve his speed figure a couple points. He ran a 111 on this day. And so far, I mean, that's kind of on par with what we've been seeing in a lot of these races. We haven't seen any of the big figure numbers yet. from this 3-year-old crop in 2022. So not sure where he'll stack up. As you said, it's not like he got any points for this race yet. So who knows what's going to happen with the Bob Baffert horses. At some point, they're going to have to change barns because I don't think Churchill is going to give in.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some legal wrangling happening over the next few months, but it does not look good for these Bob Baffert horses getting their points reinstated. So we'll see how that all develops. I don't think it's really worth speculating about right now. This race did feature a pretty fast pace, Greg, some red color-coded pace figures for the first 3 calls of the race, and I think that's why it seemed visually like Newgrange broke in mid-stretch. I'm not sure that was actually the case. I think horses like Cavode and even Ben Diesel, who was trying to make that run up the rail, they were just like dead tired by the time they got to the 8th pole, and Newgrange had a little bit of stamina left to pull away from those horses at the end. I thought Barber Road, who was second, put in another good effort. He's kind of an overachiever that's come from some more humble beginnings to gain some points on the Kentucky Derby Trail. Got off to a bit of a rough start in this race, but did make that relentless run to get up for second here. He's just a decent horse that keeps improving, but I do think we're going to see some faster 3-year-olds emerge eventually. Another race from Oaklawn Park from last weekend that will have implications on a big race at Churchill Downs in early May is the Martha Washington, which took place a little bit earlier on that Oaklawn Saturday card, and this one was won very impressively by the D. Wade Lucas-trained Secret Oath. And Craig, coming out of last year, it seemed like Echo Zulu just had a stranglehold on this 3-year-old filly division as all of these horses were turning a year older, but seems like we're having a real rival emerge now in Secret Oath. I know this didn't come up as the fastest race in the world, but you can't ask for a filly to be more visually impressive than this one was.
No, I was impressed with this race, despite the fact that it only got a 103 TimeformUS speed figure. It's a race that, it's a speed figure that would have to improve quite a bit to catch up to Echo Zulu, who was running in the mid-teens, I believe. But, she ran a 107 last time, and I think what you have to do is watch this race to get a true measure of how good this filly is right now, because the pace was definitely on the moderate side. We have one of the later fractions even as slow, and she just ranged up wide. She was pretty much wide the whole way, and she basically inhaled the field and won as she pleased. So it's a race I'm not putting a lot of stock in the speed figure. I think she definitely is in the 110 plus category right now, and closing in on Echo Zulu, who until you see him run, you never really know how they're going to come back as 3-year-olds. So right now, I would say she's right there as the co-leader of the division.
Yeah, I don't know what got into this horse in her last couple of starts, because she didn't look to be this type of talent in her first 3 runs, even when she ran that goldenrod back in November of last year. But we didn't talk about it on the TimeformUS Pacecast. I think you were on vacation at that time, Craig, back in late December when she ran on New Year's Eve. But if you go back and watch that prior performance, she was really impressive that day, winning that allowance race. The same kind of thing that we saw in this Martha Washington, where she just traveled so strongly in the bridle for the entire race, and Luis Contreras just had a ton of horse underneath him for the entire race, and he basically just had to pick his lane to take over from the leaders whenever he wanted to, and he did that on the far turn here. And as you said, she just inhaled those runners ahead of her and won off very easily. The runner-up in this race, Optionality, was coming off some pretty good performances out of town. She had won that race on Springboard Mile Night for the fillies, the filly version of that race, and she was just decidedly second best to Secret Oath in this race. And as you said, with regard to her running a slower speed figure, well, just look at the difference in the 6 furlong fractions between this Martha Washington and the Southwest run later on the card. The Martha Washington to the 6 furlong mark, they went over 2 seconds slower than the Colts did in the Southwest. So it's just impossible to run a faster final time when you run that much slower to the 3/4 fraction of your race going a mile and a 16th. So Secret Oath actually did finish up much faster than the males did later on the card, to finish just 3/5 of a second slower than the Southwest in this race. So I do think that this filly could definitely run faster if she gets into a faster paced race, and I view her as a major threat moving on to the Kentucky Oaks later in the year. Couple more races to discuss from Oaklawn Park this past weekend. One of them also took place on that Saturday card, a maiden event in the middle of the day, won by the Steve Asmussen-trained Favorite Outlaw. Craig, this horse was coming out of a pretty fast race on debut when he just missed, and he took another step forward here in his second start to win with a really impressive TimeformUS speed figure.
Yeah, he did. He stayed at the 6 furlong distance, but he increased his speed figure from a 105 all the way up to a 111. Did it running easily. I thought he was really impressive. Not sure what the plan is with him. He's by McLean's Music, so you would probably know more than me, but we've seen some McLean's Musics that can stretch out. But one thing's for sure, he's definitely a fast horse.
Yeah, this horse looks like a pure sprinter to me. He's got that really quick action of a sprinter, but I mean, it's not like he was shortening stride at the end of this race. I mean, he was really maintaining his action well through the wire. He won this race really impressively, drawing off from the field at the end. A horse was, a Brad Cox second-time starter was trying to close at him through the late stages, but a Favorite Outlaw maintained that advantage even after setting an honest pace. And on the dam side, I believe his dam, Coco Bell, she was a sprinter. I think she was a multiple stakes winning sprinter. So he is bred to go shorter, but seems like he could be a pretty talented type who definitely will be trying stakes pretty soon. The other race that we should mention before we move away from Oaklawn Park took place one day earlier on Friday's card as Warrior's Charge, a horse who I believe is 6 years old now, who's we've seen in some stakes, grade 3, grade 2 level for a few years at this point, dropped into allowance company here after a somewhat disappointing effort in the tinsel in his prior start, and certainly appreciated the class relief, Craig, as he just ran away to win this race by nearly 10 lengths.
He is a 6-year-old. I remember him well because I actually loved him when he ran into Preakness, and he ran pretty well that day. But honestly, I would say he's been a disappointment since then. He's won a decent amount of money. He's over a millionaire now, but he hasn't won a lot of big races. But he ran a big figure here. He got a 127 TimeformUS speed figure, which is the best I think he's ever run. I think he got a 126 way back in the Preakness, but whatever's been going amiss with him, they found the cure here, because from the 11 post, he just absolutely galloped and through the stretch was just destroying the field. So I would assume they're going to put him back in stakes company, and I wouldn't be quick to dismiss him off this effort because I don't think there was anything really phony about it.
This race did come up with the right recipe to run a fast speed figure because you did have a front runner, Fact Finding, who just kind of ran off on the front end and set an unreasonably fast half-mile fraction, and Warrior's Charge let that horse go. He opened up about 5 lengths on the field, but when you have a horse that's setting such a strong pace, it does kind of give a classy horse like Warrior's Charge the opportunity to run a fast speed figure if they do ride him out through the wire, and they did here, and he opened up quite a margin on the field by the time they got to the finish line. Not the strongest group behind him, definitely an allowance type of group. Not that it wasn't a stakes quality field, but Warrior's Charge, it was just nice to see him get back to the winner's circle because, as you were saying, Craig, he had been kind of a disappointment. He hadn't won in quite a while, and this was a pretty decisive victory by him. So I agree. I think we'll definitely see him back in stakes company next time.
Yeah, you make a good point about the horse running off. I mean, anybody that watches track and field when they're trying to run fast times, they always enter a runner whose sole job is to set a fast pace, and that's how they assure they get a fast final time. And that does translate over to horse racing sometimes. So it certainly did help his figure, no doubt about that.
Stop over out west in Santa Anita and talk about the couple of graded stakes that they ran on their Saturday card, both sprints on the dirt. One of them for the 3-year-olds, the grade 2 San Vicente. This was one where those who like to dunk on Bob Baffert right now definitely had their opportunity to do so, as he basically had this race covered with 3 of the 5 starters, including the 2 favorites, one that went off at 4-5 and one that off at 9-5. But Bob came up short in this race as Richard Mandela caused the minor upset with Forbidden Kingdom.
Yeah, that was a little surprising to me that he didn't get more respect. He was coming out of a race where he just set a crazy fast pace. He got one of Forbidden Kingdom, that is, for Richard Mandela. He got one of the bigger pace upgrades that you're ever going to see in a race from us. He stayed at that 7 furlong distance. He had run a 116 TimeformUS speed figure when he lost to Messier, and the rest of this field had barely cracked 100. I think Pinehurst had run in the very low hundreds. Nobody else had. So I was kind of surprised by the betting, and Forbidden Kingdom kind of proved he was the faster horse. He just took it to him early, and nobody ever really challenged him.
This is the rare race where the horses with saddle towel numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 finished in that order, and ran in that order at every call of the race. It was kind of just an odd thing to see. They just basically paraded around in that order for the entire race, with Forbidden Kingdom breaking from that one hole, getting the early lead with that ample early speed that you mentioned, Craig, that was inherent in his last speed figure. And he never looked back as those Bob Baffert runners, it seemed like they had upside, especially Doppelganger, who was bet down to the 4-5 favorite here, but he did not take a step forward in his second career start. All a little bit disappointing as Forbidden Kingdom was able to get the victory here. I don't believe this race offers any Derby qualifying points with it being a sprint, and it does seem like the winner may be more of a sprint type. I'm not sure that we'll see him stretching out in distance.
Yeah, it does not offer Derby points unless it changed this year. But I did mention Forbidden Kingdom got a 117 TimeformUS speed figure. And I will say this was a very tricky day. I haven't talked to my assistant. He just sent me his work back this morning and I uploaded the figures. But even when I looked at the worksheet, I knew there was absolutely no way you could rate this race and the one we're going to talk about next together, because it just looks like it was run over two completely different racetracks. So this race was basically rated in isolation, so take that for what it's worth. We did the best we could, but there's no doubt in my mind that it was not the same racetrack.
Well, Bob Baffert, who definitely had a tumultuous week this past week, did have a bit of a highlight on Saturday as his horse Essential Wager won the Grade 3 Palos Verdes. This one is winning his third race in a row here, Craig, after breaking his maiden in his second career start. He's now 3 for 4 in his career. It seemed like he got a very good trip to win. I'll let you talk a little bit about the pace, but it seemed like this was a much more moderate pace than what we saw in the San Vicente.
Yeah, he's going to get a 118 TimeformUS speed figure, which matches what he did last time. It was definitely a moderate pace. There were more dirt races on the card, and this one fit with the others as opposed to the San Vicente. So I would be more confident in this figure than I am in that one. And yeah, he's actually got downgraded just a little bit. I think it's going to be a couple points from his final time figure, which is going to be like a 121. And that's because, as you said, it wasn't much of a pace in here. He was able to open up a clear early lead. And I mean, let's be honest, the horse chasing him was Shooter Shoot, who was a promising 3-year-old early on last year, but hasn't really developed all that much. And when he's your main competition in a Grade 3, it's probably not going to be a super fast race.
Yeah, the big disappointment in this race was the other Bob Baffert trained horse, the 3-5 favorite Cezanne, who in his lone appearance in 2021 had run that massive 125 TimeformUS speed figure in winning a sprint stakes race, I believe the Kona Gold. But he's been seen very sparingly throughout his career, that $3+ million purchase as a 2-year-old. And it just seems like whatever's been keeping him off the track for a long time is still maybe nagging him, or it's taken its toll, because he was just not the same horse in this race.
No, he wasn't. He was also a horse that just got a great setup, kind of like what you talked about when Brickyard Ride and Axeman, two really fast horses, went out, set a really fast pace, and he was able to take advantage when those two got tired, and that probably helped him run that big 125. But in any case, this race was a disappointment because he was never even remotely in contention. Like, he never looked like he was going to win this race.
Let's wrap up the stakes action from last week by talking about one more venue with a few stakes events, that being Laurel Park, where they ran a bunch of stakes races on Saturday, a few for the Maryland breds. The Fire Plug Stakes was going 6 furlongs for the older horses, and that was won by Wonderwear Craig. He is a horse for trainer Brittany Russell, who's just been in fantastic form for the past basically 8 months or so, and he crossed the wire first for the 5th time in a row. I know he was disqualified out of one of those victories, but this horse just continues to maintain excellent form.
Yeah, he's a fast horse. I mean, he ran a faster speed figure than we saw from Essential. I'm already forgetting his name. I want to say Quality. Yeah, I know that isn't right. Essential Wager, he got a 121 for the win. Of course, I'm a little loyal to this horse because he has my name in his. But yeah, he's just always quick. He's always running around that 120 speed figure type number. He got a 121 here. So just the kind of horse you can get behind and root for because he just keeps showing up in the entry box and running well.
Craig, I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but it did seem like this track at Laurel was changing throughout the day. It felt like it ended up being a faster surface than it was at the start of the day. And you can kind of see that in the times of these two races that we're talking about here, the Fireplug and the Jennings. The Jennings being run much earlier in the day as the third race. Older horses going a mile in nearly a minute and 40 seconds, but got a comparable speed figure to Wonder Where Craig is, as Cordmaker was able to win this race. And just another horse who's been in great form for his current connections.
Yeah, this was a rare day where the track seemed to just be getting faster throughout the day on a 10-race card. We actually changed the variant 4 times. We used one for the first couple, then another variant for the third and fourth, another one for the fifth and sixth, and then it kind of evened out for the last 4 races, and each time it was a little faster than before. So it was a tricky day, but that's not unusual with the kind of weather they were having at Laurel. So it's actually one where the variant really fits. So I don't have a big problem with the figures on this day. None of them got like any of the question mark codes because everything made sense, if that makes any sense to people. When you sit down and looked at them, it was pretty obvious which races you could rate together and where the breaks occurred. So Cordmaker, he's another. He's just been a machine. He had went through a long time where he wasn't winning a lot of races, but he seems to have put that all together. He's won, I think it's 4 of his last 5, and he did so on this day with, I believe it was a 120 speed figure, very similar to which is Wonder Where Craig is. So just another one of those Mid-Atlantic horses that's a warrior because he just keeps showing up and running his race.
Yeah, the runner-up in this race, Hanale's Houdini, is probably not the kind of horse that you typically expect to run those kinds of numbers, and he's also not a horse that loves to visit the winner's circle. He does have a little bit of hang in him, so Cordmaker may be helped by that a little bit in getting to the wire first in this race, but again, I don't want to knock this horse. He's just a really likable type. He's shown up in a bunch of these stakes races against state breds and open company over the past number of years, and he's just continued to improve, and now he's in his 7-year-old year and still winning races, arguably more often than he has in the past. So just a really admirable older horse. Craig, as we look through this day, when you see days like this, I sometimes like to look at the buyer numbers and your numbers to make some comparisons and see just how you guys rated them, if there are any differences. And the only race that you and buyer really disagreed about was the Spectacular Bid, right in the middle of the card when it seemed like the track was changing, and that was won by Witty. You gave this horse a gigantic for a Maryland bred 114 TimeformUS speed figure. It seemed like buyer rated this race with maybe the later races in the day, perhaps with that Wonder Where Craig is race, because it did go slower than that one, but it did seem like maybe the track wasn't finished changing at this point. So I don't have a big problem with you giving this horse a big number. He was certainly visually impressive in winning this race.
Yeah, this is one right where the split was. As I said, I did 5 and 6 together, and then 7 through 10, and this was race 6. Had I rated it with race 5 and with races 7, 8, 9, and 10, it would have been several points lower, but it didn't really fit for the rest of the horses. Witty's a 3-year-old who has been in good form. He was just his second time in the new barn, and I'm always going to assume that these horses are getting better. It was his first time running as a 3-year-old, and that's the way I went. Otherwise, I would have had all these horses in the field regressing. So I think he actually ran a pretty big race in here. It's not like the rest of them had these big major jumps off of that race. So I'm going to stick with it, but it's certainly one that I'll monitor.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about Witty and the big speed figure improvement is that his prior race, when he won that Pennsylvania Nursery, that's a race where it got kind of a surprisingly low speed figure, which, that's just the way it came up. It was a slow race, but since it was a race that featured an aberrationally fast pace, and since then we've seen a lot of horses come back out of that race and run much faster in their subsequent starts. So I just wonder if maybe that's a race that's a lot better than that 87 TimeformUS speed figure that it got. And Craig, you had that race no slower than Buyer did. You both had that race very slow, and that's just the way it came up. But maybe that was a stronger race than it seemed, because Whitty took a gigantic step forward here, and you could see it early in this race. He was traveling much closer to the pace than he had in prior starts. He took over pretty early on the far turn and just drew off from this field with really powerful strides. This is an exciting horse for young trainer McLean Hendricks. I believe he doesn't have that many horses, but he's just gotten a few from, I believe, his mother, Elizabeth Merriman, who used to train this horse and who bred this horse. Whitty is a half-brother to the Elizabeth Merriman previously trained. I believe she's retired now. Caravel, the one that was purchased by Bobby Flay last year. So definitely pedigree for this horse to be good, and I saw that he is nominated to the Triple Crown, so they might try a Derby prep at some point.
Interesting. I agree about that PA Nursery. It does look like a better race than the figures. There really wasn't any problem making the figures that day. I just figured it's one of those when the pace gets hot, particularly at 7 furlongs for 2-year-olds, they don't really seem to finish off their races, and I would say he more just took a step forward here.
Before we finish up the show, Craig, I know there was one more race that you wanted to mention from Tampa Bay Downs on Sunday, an allowance race for the 3-year-olds going 2 turns on the dirt, and this was won by the highly touted Todd Pletcher trained Emmanuel, a horse that we expected to see in a similar race about a month ago, but I know he had to be scratched, I believe, because of a fever. He did finally make his second start here, and he took his record to 2 for 2 pretty impressively.
He did. It's an interesting race, and it wasn't particularly fast. He had run a 95 first time out. He only ran a 98 TimeformUS speed figure here, but that was knocked down quite a bit. The final time figure was a 107. What was crazy here was the pace. The early figures were in the 50s. So the main reason I wanted to point this out, I'm not saying this is a true Derby contender. I think we don't really know yet because he wasn't challenged at all. He was all clear by himself. I mean, somebody moved up to him at the top of the lane, and then he just basically brushed off that Mark Castrain glider and drew away. So I do think there's some talent there. I just don't think we know exactly how much. It's probably too soon to think he would show up in the Sam Davis. I think that race is in just a couple weeks, but I would imagine the Tampa Derby, if not shipped back to Gulfstream, but he's got a date with a 3-year-old Derby points race pretty soon.
Yeah, I guess the natural comparison to this horse would be Always Dreaming, who did win a very similar allowance race, I believe with a similarly slow pace at Tampa Bay Downs back in, I guess it was 2017, 5 years ago, before he won the Kentucky Derby that year. And obviously he did go on to run some faster speed figures eventually in a race like the Florida Derby. But we'll see if Emmanuel turns out to be that good, Craig. As you said, he did finish up in pretty good time just for like closing splits in this race. He was basically sprinting through the wire in a race where he was just vastly superior to those that finished behind him. And we'll see what he does when he faces a more competitive pace scenario. It does seem like he's a horse that wants to be close to the front end. With horses like this that get to set very slow fractions stretching out and just sprint for home, you do wonder about how far they ultimately want to go. This does seem like one that's bred to go farther, even though he's by More Than Ready, who you probably don't think of as a sire that gets a ton of 1.25 horses. There is a lot of pedigree on the dam side. His dam is a half-sister to Hawkbill, who I think won going 1.5 miles on the turf for Godolphin, as well as Free Drop Billy, who was on the Derby Trail a number of years ago for Dale Romans. So there is pedigree for this one to handle those route distances, so we'll see if he's able to run a little faster in the future.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say for every Always Dreaming, there's been a few since that Todd Pletcher sent to Tampa that have won allowance races easy, and the reason I don't remember their names is because they didn't do much afterwards. So you just kind of got to wait and see. These are the tough horses to deal with. So it's just one of those, I'm not sure. I guess it depends who he stacks up against and what kind of odds he is, whether I would want to take a betting interest in him.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. With horses that run slower speed figures like this, I'm more inclined to upgrade a horse like Secret Oath, who came from off the pace and has shown that dimension to run well in faster paced races because she's got that style where she can drop further back, than a horse like Emmanuel, who wants to be forwardly placed and got that slow pace that he could set in this race. So he's got some things to prove, but obviously he is very lightly raced and he's got plenty of upside. So we'll see what he does when he tries tougher company in the future. Craig, that's it for this week's podcast. podcast. There was a lot to get through. We tried to move through it as quickly as possible. We'll be coming down from that Pegasus World Cup week as we move on to these subsequent stakes weeks in February. But there are some Derby preps taking place around the country this upcoming Saturday and Sunday, as well as the following week. So we'll definitely find some things to handicap on the TimeformUS forecast a little bit later. Maybe Aqueduct, because I would imagine that their Saturday card will be somewhat beefed up after canceling both days this past weekend. You would think that they'd have a strong card to put together. So we'll see how those come up, and we'll decide what to handicap for this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, sounds good. I did want to mention one more race just very quickly. It wasn't anything too exciting, but it was a grade 2 at Santa Anita, the San Marcos. Friars Road actually ran a really nice race. Got a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. He beat Say the Word, who's a grade 2 winner in the past. So I don't want to think people get accused of that East Coast bias, even though I haven't lived on the East Coast in a long, long time. I thought Friars Road ran a nice race for trainer Mike McCarthy, and he's going to be dangerous out west in races similar to this, these 1.25 mile, 1.5 mile type races.
Yep, that's actually my bad. I forgot to add that race to the list, so good call of audible there to Craig to mention it. Yeah, Friars Road, I watched that race and was very impressed with his performance. Seemed like that main rival, Say the Word, just really needs 1.5 miles to be at his best. The bettors were onto that too. Friars Road just a little better than him over that shorter 1.25 mile distance, but I'm glad you mentioned that because that was a pretty impressive performance and I think a career best by that horse. So that's it for this week's podcast, everybody. Remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up on Friday.